We want to go back now to Ilya Ponomarev, who, as I said, is the former Russian State Duma official who left because of the invasion by his country of Ukraine and is currently opening a new television channel to try to counter Russian propaganda. So first, let me ask you, Ilya, you've been on our show shortly after the war started, after your nation invaded its neighbor, Ukraine. And you've seen today the so-called Victory Day parade. How do you analyze what it looked like? It was seriously scaled back. There have been headlines saying that it showed Russian weakness, not Russian strength. How do you assess?
No, indeed, I think it's a significant scale back, just 45 minutes. That's the shortest military parade of all times that were happening in Russia, and I saw many. Vladimir Putin was obviously afraid of a drone attack, so he surrounded himself with hostages. He took other leaders of CIS countries to protect him because he was sure that Russian partisans would not fire in these circumstances, not to provoke a major international conflict. And still, he was afraid. And also, parading were not the diverse Russian military entities, because they mostly perished at the field of war, but some military students and some Cossacks, which were unseen before.
Ilya Ponomarev, can you let's just dive into what you just said, that he was afraid of a drone attack and he had hostages, and you say from other CIS countries, that is, the Commonwealth, the countries that broke away from the Soviet Union and now independent countries. You said he was afraid of an attack by what? You said Russian partisans? Who is he afraid of?
As you have seen on the 3rd of May in the night, there was attack on Kremlin's dome by 2 drones that were fired from the outskirts of Moscow. And the source of this attack is Russian resistance. And the reason for this attack was to actually force Vladimir Putin to cancel the parade altogether, so that Russians would understand that the war is lost.
How do you know this? Ilya, stop for 1 second. It's really important. I'm really interested in your sourcing on this, because as you know, the Kremlin blamed Ukraine. They said it was a botched assassination attempt. Obviously, Ukraine denies it. But you have specific information. How do you know it's the Russian resistance?
Obviously, Kremlin is producing a lot of fake news, and one of these fake news is it's Ukrainians behind it. And then, by the way, the masterminds for Ukrainians were the Americans, and that it was them who were behind. But obviously, about what kind of assassination can you speak if it is an attack on the dome of the main building in Kremlin? First of all, nobody knows where Putin stays in particular when he is there. Secondly, he was not there, and that was a known information for everyone. I know this because I was speaking to people who were preparing this attack a month ago, and at that time they started preparing, and we were discussing whether it's the right idea to do it on the 9th of May, and I was advising against, because I was saying that first of all that would put civilians in danger, and secondly, because it's such a sacred day for Russians that may achieve the opposite result. So they decided to make this attack beforehand to try to force Putin to cancel the parade altogether.
So basically, you're saying on our air on CNN that you were involved in this drone attack, or at least in talking to the people who did it, that they're Russians, Russian resistance. So what is their aim? What is their full aim?
I would like to stress that I'm not taking the credit in organizing this fantastic attack, although I think it was a great show. But definitely, yes, Russian resistance is growing. It's behind many attacks already inside Russia. There are at least thousands of people who is involved in the resistance inside the country, and it's not Ukrainians, and they are trying to stop the war. And these are brave anti-fascists of today, and they are doing their best to actually save the honor of their country, because most of the Russian opposition left the country and they resigned from the fight. And these people are still fighting.
Okay, so the question is then, because that's what everybody wants to know, and you seem to be in touch with people there. There still is, according to Levada and others, which I know operate under strictures, but seemingly overwhelming support for President Putin. There still are people there in huge numbers who are going to war to fight for Putin and who are being recruited and who are answering the call. So what is the actual state of people's belief in this war? Russian people.
People who are going to war, they fight not for Putin, they are fighting for money, because Putin put all the country into a complete misery, and still majority of Russians are living worse than they were living during Soviet Union times. So they are struggling for their survival, and they are taking whatever money is available there without thinking what does it mean to actually go and fight against such a close friends, former friends, and former brothers and sisters of Ukrainians. That's awful, but it is a fact. But if we look inside and look at what people are actually supporting this war, actively supporting this war, then we will see that it's 10-15% of Russians who are standing on those imperialist positions, and there are 20-25% of Russians who are standing on active anti-war position. The rest is just a swamp. They are telling the sociologists whatever they think Mr. Putin wants to hear, because they're simply afraid.
So can you tell me what you hope to achieve, and can you achieve, with your new channel that's designed to counter the Kremlin's propaganda? And let's face it, they have every massive tool at their disposal, state media and everything else. Everything else is shut down inside Russia.
No, obviously, we are right now pretty small. We have 100,000 of subscribers and approximately 8 million of monthly audience, which is nothing being compared with the scale that we need to achieve. But at the moment of the change, we hope to be the source of information, because we are linked to the Russians who are actually fighting. We are linked to Russians who are fighting together with Ukrainians at the field of war, and we connected to those resistance groups which are fighting inside Russia. And we saw an example in Belarus of project called Nexta, which played a key role in protest against President Lukashenko just 3 years ago. And we hope to take the same niche with our project.
And finally, I know we've talked about the Russian resistance, but do you believe, according to the Pentagon papers that were leaked, and you've seen what Prigozhin has been doing, yelling at certain members like the defense minister and the commander, do you believe that there is infighting or differences within the Kremlin, within the Russian, chain of command, within Putin's circle about this war?
Obviously, there are a lot of internal problems, and there is a lot of internal fight, and there is a fight of Prigozhin with everyone, and there are fights between political circles in Kremlin, and there are fights between business circles. But the reality is that overwhelming majority of Russian elite, I would assess it as like 90% of Russian elite, is right now position-minded in terms of this war. They want to stop the war. They want to escape. They want their personal way out, and they're looking for this way out. They're right now competing to be the first to find this way out. So there is very little loyalty to Vladimir Putin, and that's why it's our job, together with the countries of Ramstein coalition, is to propose them this way out, and then the regime of Putin would finally collapse.
And very quickly, what is the way out? How does it end?
They need to defect. They need to switch sides. They need to start supporting Ukraine in this war, and they need to start supporting Russian resistance. It's pretty obvious. But for this, we all need to say, yes, we want the regime change in Russia. We don't want Putin to stay in power, and we don't want to let him select anyone to replace him. we want the fundamental change.
Ilya Ponomarev, former member of the State Duma, thank you for joining us from Poland, and we will
Thanks for
continue to
having me.
check in with you